Hi guys, James at Rampant Lion Reviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one, we are going to stick to Japan and we're going to return to a brewery that's featured on the channel once before. So the last beer that I tried from these guys was really interesting and really quite experimental, and that review came back in about 2019 when this brewery was extremely new. Over the last few years, they've been building their reputation, continuing to experiment more, and they've built a really kind of solid fan base, and a lot of people are writing very good things about them these days. But the beer we're going to have a look at today is a style that I haven't tried from them before. I don't believe I've tried this style brewed by a Japanese brewery either, if memory serves me correctly. In honesty, it's a style that I'm not the greatest fan of, but considering this brewery, I have to say I was just very, very curious about this one. So yeah, this should hopefully make for quite an interesting review. But needless to say, I'm very curious to see what it's going to have in store for us. Hopefully it's another good beer. Hopefully it makes for an interesting review. And as always, I hope that you guys enjoy my take on this one as well. So yeah, for this review then, we are going to go to Omihachiman City in Shiga Prefecture to the northwest of me here in Osaka, quite close to Lake Biwa. And we're going to have a look at another beer from Two Rabbits Brewing Company. So this particular beer is called Peaky Rabbits. It comes in at 5.5% ABV, and this one is an extra special bitter, or English bitter, I guess we can call it as well. But yeah, as I've mentioned on the channel a number of times before, I'm not the greatest fan of English bitters. I've actually found that the ones brewed outside of England are better than the ones brewed in England. Two of my favourites, of course, would be the Bideru bitter from Nynäshamn Ångbryggeri in a little bit to the south of Stockholm in Sweden, and also the Örebro bitter from Närke Kulturbryggeri. Those are both very nice, but they are English bitters brewed with American hops, from what I understand. But this is the very first time I'm trying a Japanese brewed English bitter, so I'm very, very curious to see what this is going to have in store for us. So yeah, let's crack on and see what we have with this one. The last beer we tried from this brewery was it was either a Hefeweizen or a wit beer, but I did really enjoy it. And when I saw this one, I thought it was kind of cool. The Peaky Rabbits, obviously a reference to Peaky Blinders. But yeah, let's crack on and see what we have here. So as always with my reviews, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward. All the usual links can be found in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that I've done from Two Rabbits Brewing Company before, and hopefully we'll add more to that in the near future. But there's all the usual social media down there. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The support you give is massively appreciated, and remember, you can go into the channel homepage and search for beer using the geography based tagging system. Use the search bar, put in your hometown, city, state, county, prefecture, whatever you like, and if I've reviewed beers from your local area, they will pop up. Otherwise, you can check out the playlist of beers from different countries, and you will find this one in the Japanese playlist. But yeah, let's go on to my brewery notes then and talk a little bit about Two Rabbits Brewing Company. So, Two Rabbits Brewing Company, as I mentioned to you, are based in Omihachiman City in Shiga Prefecture, which is close to Lake Biwa, and it's kind of to the northwest of Osaka. But they can be found in the heart of the old town among the old canals. But the brewery was founded in late 2017 by Ayako and Sean Collett, along with Bat Batar Pure Ochir. So Sean is originally from Australia, but was born to New Zealander, Kiwi, whatever you want to call them, parents. So bit of an Aussie, bit of a Kiwi there. And he met Bato while they were studying for their MBA at Kyoto University. But Bato worked for a number of years in the IT industry, whereas Sean had considerable experience working within the oil and gas industry. And Ayako studied in Australia for a number of years and worked previously as a primary school teacher, and it was there that she met Sean. And the two, of course, later decided they would move back to Australia when they became a couple. But today, she is the company head and she runs the business side of the brewery along with Bato, whereas Sean takes care of the brewing side of things. But the name Two Rabbits is taken from an old Japanese saying or proverb, which is, if you run after two rabbits, then you won't catch either. And I think it's pretty cool, actually. There's a lot of really interesting old Japanese proverbs like that. But originally they ran just a very small production, only producing a very small amount of bottles, and the rest of their beers went into casks. But they had two series, the original series and the Classic Bunny series, and that was at the time that we reviewed the last beer from them, which was back in 2019. They now have a tap room. They ran a tap room originally at the brewery I think it was a couple of times a month they would run that, but they now have a bar just over the water from the brewery, which is called the Rabbit Hutch, and that is something that I do need to check out in the future as well. But in recent times, they've been upgrading the brewery infrastructure and brewing a number of different styles, experimenting with more recipes and things like that, and they have recently started canning their beers as well. And if you check back to my original review that I did from this brewery, it was a 330 or 350 milliliter bottle that they did. But as of December 2022, when I'm filming this review for you, these guys have produced 135 different kinds of beer according to Untappd, and they've done a whole variety of different styles. I bought this beer in Osaka, and the shop had two different IPAs. It was the Bunny Kick and the Bunny Punch, and then they had this one as well, which I believe is a very recent release. But this one just caught my eye because, like I say, I haven't reviewed too many bitters on the channel because it's a style that I'm not the greatest fan of. But yeah, it's also the first time I've tried a Japanese English bitter, so yeah, that should be really quite interesting. But that's all I can really tell you about Two Rabbits Brewing Company for the moment. If you want to learn more about these guys, you can check out the brewery website, you can follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest goings on, and you can check out the Rate Beer and Untappd pages to learn more about all the different beers that they've done. But yeah, let's get on and actually have a little look at this beer itself. So I'll just let you have a wee look at the artwork on this one before we open it up. It does look pretty nice, I have to say. Like I said earlier, this one is obviously a reference to Peaky Blinders, Peaky Rabbits. You can't really go wrong there. You can see at the top of the can, there is the Two Rabbits Brewing Company symbol. But yeah, I'm trying to figure out, is this one it's 360 milliliters, which is quite interesting. Usually the Japanese cans are 350. But like I said to you earlier, this one is a 5.5% English style bitter. And I believe it was canned. I think this sticker tells you the canning date, so the 22nd of November 2016. So this is very fresh. But I did get some stats on the beer. It said on the Untappd page, this one has a malt base of Chevalier, Carapils, aromatic malt, crystal medium, rolled oats, and also some Manuka smoked malt. And there's Challenger hops in there and a Verdant IPA yeast as well. So this is already quite an unusual English bitter, I have to say. So yeah, we'll need to see what we get from this one. I'm saying English bitter, but of course we were referring to extra special bitter. But to be honest, I think the terms are rather kind of synonymous, to be honest. But yeah, really nicely presented beer, this one. Let's get it out into the glass and see what we have. As I say, just very, very curious to try my first Japanese brewed English bitter. There we are. Yeah, it's just a nice pour actually. So anyway, as you can see, before the head disappears, we'll take a wee quick look at that. You can see this beer's poured with about a half finger of a frothy, I would say kind of ivory coloured head. You can see a mix of small bubbles there on the bottom and medium-sized bubbles kind of as you go further up, but that is just fading away to be a very thin foamy layer, and it's going to leave a nice kind of ring around the edge of the glass. But one or two big bubbles sticking toward the side of the glass, a few little ones going up toward the bottom of the head there. But overall, it does look pretty nice. In terms of colour, I would describe this one as being like a kind of medium mahogany, chestnutty type colour, which is to be expected of an English bitter, of course. You can see that the beer is unfiltered. It does have that nice little bit of haze to it. But yeah, it does look pretty good. So remember, the colour of your beer depends on one, the type of malts that you use. This goes a long way to determining your EBC rating. Two, the length of your wort boil is also going to play a role, because the longer you boil the wort, the more the sugars caramelise, and thus you get a darker colour of beer. Any barrel aging that you do or any adjuncts that you put in will affect the colour of the beer too. But yeah, when it comes to English or extra special, whatever you want to call them, bitters, I don't think you often have to care about that. But yeah, if you guys take a little look at this, you can see there is a nice sort of steady stream of bubbles just going up there with this one. But it looks nice. Nothing particularly surprising about this beer in terms of its appearance when you consider what style it is. But yeah, it does look pretty good, I have to say. So yeah, let's have a wee look at the aroma of this one and see what we have. Yeah, I'm going to say straight away, that is pretty damn authentic. Yeah, it's pretty much bang on the money. As you'll know if you've watched the channel before, I'm a huge fan of the more kind of malty-leaning styles, you know, the Dunkel, the Alt beer, the Doppelbock, the Scotch ale, of course, my native beer style, you know, Belgian quadruples, and so on. I love the big kind of malty beast barley wines as well. English milds I do quite enjoy, I have to say, too. But English bitters, I don't know why. I've just always felt personally that English hops are better suited to more malty style beers like porters and stouts. That's one of the main reasons why I've never been the greatest fan of English golden ales, English IPAs, stuff like that. I think English hops are just better suited to darker and more malty styles of beer. The bitter's one that's just kind of on the border for me. Either they can be very nice or they're just not great. But yeah, this one I have to say does smell quite nice. You've got a whole host of different things going on in there. The aroma has a good bit of depth to it, which is, for me, something that I want after 3,600 reviews. So I'm just going to say straight away to Rabbits Brewing Company, they've done this. It smells pretty authentic, but it does have a wee bit more complexity than the English brewed bitters that I've come across over the years. So let's try and break this aroma down and just describe it for you a wee bit more in depth. So, yeah, that's quite nice, I have to say. So, backbone of the beer for me, you absolutely get some of that kind of slightly toasty, grainy, like rye bread crust. That's definitely the backbone of the beer. Within that, there's a little bit of woodiness for sure. Absolutely getting a little bit of woodiness out of this one. Potentially a few kind of nutty notes. But above the bread crust in this one, there's definitely a bit of a sweet rye bread type character. And within that, you can smell there's a little touch of smokiness. But the smoky malt that you get out of this beer is really subtle in a lot of ways. It's definitely more of a kind of smokiness that's embedded in the bready character. But above the rye bread, I'm getting a lot of kind of wholemeal brown bready character. There's a good little bit of wholemeal brown bready character in this one. And then above that, there's a few elements of kind of brown sugar and things going on. This beer, yeah, as I say, bread crust, rye bread, wholemeal brown bread, a little bit of a kind of, as I say, a little bit of a kind of nutty and woody aroma in there as well. But yeah, aroma wise, it's really quite nice. Yeah, there's just that little bit of smokiness in there. I'm curious to see whether that's a bit more prominent in the flavour right enough. Above that though, you're getting some brown sugar out of the beer. I forget the malt types. We've got that in here. Carapils and aromatic malt. Crystal's going to give you a wee bit of this too. So yeah, there's a good bit of, there's a few malts in this one that really are going to give you some brown sugary notes. You don't have too much in the way of leathery brown sugar to this beer. It's actually a little bit more kind of caramelized. So yeah, a really nice kind of more caramelized yeah, there's a little bit of a more kind of caramelized brown sugary note to this one, and it's got a good little bit of dryness to it as well, which I find really quite interesting. So there's a little touch of leatheriness there, a little bit more of a kind of caramelized note, not really toasty, but as I say, more kind of bready and oily and stuff like this. So yeah, there's a wee bit of sweet caramel, wee bit of roasty caramel, also some kind of McVitie's digestive biscuity notes in there as well, which I find quite interesting. Again, I'm not sure how good a descriptor that is for the Japanese viewer, the Australian Kiwi viewer, whatever, but to me it really smells a little bit of McVitie's digestive biscuit. But as I say, the whole aroma, the whole malt base in this in the aroma of this beer is very authentic to an English bitter, and this is one of these beers where, you know, when it comes to these traditional beers, I think it's always about how close you get them to the originals that marks the quality of the beer. So yeah, the malt base in this one I think is done really well, and the yeasty character I think is very nice too. But yeah, the aroma on the malty side of things gets a thumbs up from me. But I think the further you go into it, it gets more grainy and more woody, which is something you would expect of the style. On the hoppy side of things, again, for me, it's kind of what you would expect from English hops. You've got a good little bit of earthiness in there. It's quite a smooth earthiness, I would say. There's a little bit of a kind of herbal character. And then you've got that kind of brighter floral, you've got a little bit of brighter floral note in there, and a good little bit of like a wet grassiness. But it does also have a little bit of brightness to it as well, which I think is quite nice. So yeah, the way this beer goes together for me is really nicely done. So the green component gets a thumbs up from me too. On the fruity side of things, I find it quite interesting because there's a little bit of there is most definitely a little bit of fruity, fruity dryness to this one. Like I'm getting quite a bit of pear, like a bit of a dried pear and a slightly apricot-y thing out of this one. But I'm also getting a little touch of red fruit, a very slightly candied strawberry, maybe a little bit of fig or something like that going on. Yeah, a little bit of fig, a little bit of black currant maybe, a little bit of almost candied strawberry, but then a big oily peary character to it as well. Yeah, aroma wise, I think this beer goes together really quite nicely, and as I say, very authentic for an English bitter, which is kind of what you want when you go to this style. But you want, if it's a more modern craft beer take on the style, you want that bigger, bolder flavour. But yeah, impressed with the aroma, I have to say. So let's crack on and have a wee bit of have a wee taste of this beer, as we should say. So this one is the Peaky Rabbits, an extra special bitter, 5.5% ABV from Rabbits Brewing Company in Omihachiman City in Shiga Prefecture here in Japan. Let's get stuck in. Slange, skål, cheers, kanpai. Yeah, I'm going to say that is pretty nice. The thing that I'm getting out of this beer, first and foremost, is that it's actually a very well balanced beer, this one. You've got a good bit of smoothness, you've got a little bit of dryness out of it, it's true to the style. Yeah, I can only say good things about this beer. As I mentioned to you before, the English bitter, the extra special bitter, whatever you want to call it, it's not my favourite style of beer. If I'm going to go kind of more brown sugary, I'm going to go for a Scotch ale, a quadruple, a doppelbock. I'm going to go for this. The English bitter for me, I don't know what it is about this style. As I say, I'm just not the greatest fan of it. But I do have to say, this kind of, for me, it kind of shows that when there's a Japanese brewery brewing this and doing it better than I think it would be in England, it kind of says it all for me. I've had there's two really good bitters in Sweden that you can get very readily. Nynäshamn Bryggeri, Bederud bitter, Närkekulta Bryggeri's Örebro bitter. Those are very nice, brewed with American Cascade hops. And then we've got this one, which I think is really pretty well done as well. I don't know what it is. I think it's the more craft take on the English bitter works a bit more for me than the old school traditional English one does. So I'm going to say thumbs up to Rabbits Brewing Company here, because they've produced for me what is actually quite a nice beer within a style category that I don't like, to be honest. So yeah, they've got my respect for this. We'll need to try something from them. They've got, as I say, they've got a few IPAs and things these days. I'd love to try a Scotch ale from them. That would be pretty cool. But yeah, we'll try something from them that's a style category that I really like at some stage. But they've done a very solid beer here, and in terms of the English bitter, it's authentic enough, but it does give you that kind of bolder flavour you want from a more craft brewery take on the style. So this beer has my respect, and this brewery has my respect. We'll say that. Yeah. So let's break this down and describe it a wee bit more in depth for you. We'll start off in the middle third of the palate, as we always do. So backbone of the beer, absolutely, you've got a little bit of that kind of slightly toasty, grainy bread crust. That's the backbone of the beer. Toward the front of that middle third of your palate, there's a little bit of a woody character. And then on top of that, you have a little touch of, on top of that, you get that more sort of oily, rye bready note coming out of this one. And it's actually the kind of crystal malt. I believe crystal malt's a German malt. It actually has, probably the reason I like this one is because it does have a little bit of that kind of Brauhaus German Dunkel quality to it. So above the bread crust, you're actually getting this lovely, slightly oily, rye bready character coming out of the beer. And like I say, this one to an extent does remind me a wee bit of a German Dunkel in some ways. Within that rye bread, you've got a little touch of the smokiness, and the smokiness isn't particularly meaty, nor is it particularly peaty. You just get a little bit of the, it's kind of a dry, smoky character you get out of this. But as I say, it's just embedded in that sort of rye bready layer that this beer has. Above that, you start to get a more kind of straight up wholemeal brown bread out of this beer, and that is a little bit taller, I would say, as well. So you've got the bread crust, the rye bread, the sort of wholemeal brown bread, and then beyond that, you start to get the kind of brown sugary side of the beer. So yeah, above that kind of wholemeal brown bready layer, there's the brown sugary notes out of this one. And the brown sugary notes are really quite interesting because they're almost in like a bowl. It's kind of like that bready layer has a bowl in the middle of it, and then the brown sugar's got sort of layers. So the base layer is a kind of leathery, the base layer is like a kind of leathery brown sugar, which quite often in brewing indicates like a long wort boil. That's a popular technique to use when it comes to barley wines or imperial stouts. But yeah, base of the brown sugary layer is quite leathery. Above that, you start to get a really oily, caramelly brown sugary note, but in the middle of your palate, you can feel there is a bit of a kind of straight up sweet caramel. So if we take that from the top, you've got sweet caramel, a more slightly caramelized and oily dry caramel, and then you've got the leathery base, which is kind of interesting. If you push out toward the extremities of that middle third of the palate, you get a few sort of McVitie's digestive biscuity notes from this one. So yeah, the way it goes together, I think, is really quite nice. And from that malt base, you actually do start to get a little bit of a more kind of woody, as I say, the further into the aftertaste you go with this beer, you start to get more of a kind of woody and nutty vibe to it, which I think is quite interesting. It does dry out this beer and give you that more woody and nutty type character into the aftertaste. But I think we've covered the middle third of the palate enough. Let's look at the back third of the palate then. So the border region between middle and back third of your palate, you get a good little bit of bready kind of build up there. The base of the back third of your palate is, of course, more bread crusty, and that is a bit drier and a little bit more it's a little bit drier, a little bit more grainy. Remember, more grainy and bitter flavours come out further back on the palate, sweeter flavours come out further forward, so definitely getting some of that there. The rye bready layer is absolutely taller than it is in the middle third of the palate. Then the wholemeal layer is again taller than that, and I do like how that goes together. Above that though, you start to get a little bit of a kind of crispness. There's a bit of a kind of grainy crispness to this beer, but the border region between middle and back third of the palate is like a lighter bready note. It's a kind of it just feels a little bit lighter, and above all of that, there's a more kind of yeasty character coming out of the beer, and there's a few interesting things going on there. It's a bit more like a kind of farmhousey, wholemeal, brown bready sort of thing. It's a little bit woody. It's also a little bit more it's a little bit woody. There's a little bit of a kind of honeycomb type flavour as well. The yeasty notes just sit above the kind of top layer of the bread on the back third of the palate. But as I always say, the back third of the palate is definitely taller, and as you come further forward, the flavours just condense down and squash together in the middle third of your tongue. But malty wise, I think this beer is really nicely done. And as I say, it's authentic, but it's bold enough that it keeps my interest. As I say, do not like extra style bitters, extra special bitters, English bitters, whatever you want to call them especially, but I think this beer is well done and it's got a bold enough flavour pardon me, that it can keep my interest. So that's a credit to it and the brewery, I would say. On the hoppy side of things, then, back corners of the palate, you've got a nice little bit of earthiness for sure. This is one of the characteristics of English hops. As you come further forward, it's a little bit more herbal, and as you reach the kind of front corners of the tongue, you do get a little bit more of a kind of floral, aromatic sort of thing coming out of the beer as well. Yeah, I do like how that goes together. But round the front curve of the tongue, it's a little bit more oily, it's a little bit more grassy, and again, I do quite enjoy that too. So, yeah, the way the hoppy side of this beer goes together, I think, is pretty authentic actually. Yeah, it's English hops. I think it's a bit silly to say it's authentic, but again, the way that this beer kind of sticks to the style profile and does things a bit more boldly, I think, is really nice. But the sort of earthy herbal character mixed with the brighter floral and grassy notes, I think, gives the beer that little bit more kind of panache and oomph, if you like. But yeah, I think green component, it really works and keeps the beer true to the style. So let's look at the front third of your palate and the fruity side of things then. So the border region between front third and middle third of your palate, you get a little bit of that bready build up there. So a little bit of a kind of brown bready character. Then the base of the front third of your palate, there's a wee touch of the bread crust, but for me it's more a kind of smooth and sweet brown bready character. And on top of that, you've got that nice oily, you do have that nice kind of oily kind of fruity note there that just that oily bubble where the fruits just kind of roll their way out of the beer, and I think this is quite nice in this one. So when you first take the beer in, there's absolutely a little bit of a slightly sharper red fruit in it. So yeah, when you take the beer in, you've got a little touch of raisin there on the back half of that front third of your palate, but then as you go further down, you start to get, there's a more kind of datey flavour to it, and then you start to get that drier sultana, the dry white green grapey character. So raisin, date, sultana. And as you move forward on the front third of your palate, it's a little bit more of an oily pear that comes out of the beer. But at the same time, in the base, there's a little touch of fig right in the middle, and then you've got a little bit of a kind of black curranty flavour in the front half of that front third of your palate, and the sort of oily pear is just creeping above that. So yeah, the fruity notes in this beer are they're quite dry in a sense, but you have got a little tiny touch of sharpness. So yeah, raisin, date, sultana, sort of figgy in the middle, black currant, and then above the front half of the front third of your palate, it is more like a really oily, dry pear character that you're getting out of this one. So yeah, it really works, and as I say, it's a slightly bolder version of an English bitter, and for me that's what makes it work. I think the English bitters are a bit boring and a bit dry and too grainy. This one has a bit more maltiness to it, so you've got a bit more sweetness in there, you've got a bit more fruitiness as well. So yeah, the way everything goes together in this beer for me makes it really quite nicely done. So thumbs up to Rabbits Brewing Company. They've taken a beer style that I am not the greatest fan of and done it pretty damn well, I have to say. And this does remind me of the Örebro bitter from Närke and the Bedre bitter from Nynäs in Sweden, and those are two very, very nice beers actually. So this beer has my respect. I need to try a style of beer from this brewery that I really quite like and just see what I make of that. But these guys, if this is the kind of quality of beer they're doing these days, I think it stands them in good stead, absolutely. So to Rabbits Brewing, have my respect for sure. I just took this beer basically out of interest, and it certainly hasn't let me down, it hasn't disappointed me, so we can say that for sure. Yep. Anyway, let's go on to the mouthfeel of this one then. So mouthfeel wise, mid-bodied, carbonation is very smooth. Overall, it's kind of clean, but it's kind of grainy. You expect that from an English bitter. It's got a good bit of dryness to it as well. In terms of IBUs, it's a bit difficult to kind of place, to be honest with you, because you have got the grainy dryness which is inherent with the style, but you've also got a little bit of hoppy bitterness to this beer. So I would say it's maybe about 30-ish IBUs on the hoppy side of things, but there is a good bit more dryness to the style too. It has got a real grainy dryness to it. So that makes me think, you know, potentially it's got a bit of 40 or 50 IBU kind of quality to it in terms of the dryness of the beer. But the maltiness, the malty side of the beer, as I say, good bit of dryness, lovely bit of smoothness, good touch of sweetness to it as well, which are all things you expect of this style. You've got a good bit of fruity character in there. The fruitiness is quite oily for me, but it shows you the drier side the further into the aftertaste you go. And this beer shows you a nice woody, nutty character, which is something you expect from the English bitter style as well. So yeah, the mouthfeel I think is really nice. It's a very authentic English bitter, but it shows you that kind of bolder flavour you expect from a more American style craft brewery, which is what I guess we can classify Two Rabbits as being. So yeah, impressed with this one. As I say, a style that I don't normally like, but I think Two Rabbits have done a really nice beer out of this. So the next review we do from Two Rabbits is going to be a style that I quite enjoy. I think we need to make sure of that. But yeah, this is an impressive beer, I have to say that for sure. So this one, to round off, was the Peaky Rabbits, a 5.5% English bitter, extra special bitter as they're calling it on the can. And this one comes to you from, how do we say this city again? Omihachiman city in Shiga Prefecture. So yeah, hopefully we can get up there and have a little look at their tap room at some stage, do an out and about video. But yeah, these guys are definitely worth checking out if you get the chance, and their beers are getting out there a little bit more these days as well. But yeah, once again, thank you for watching my beer reviews. Until the next time, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comment section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from Two Rabbits Brewing Company as well. We will return to these guys at some point in the near future. But until the next time, check out my social media, check out their social media, and I'll see you guys in the next review. Slange, Skull, cheers. Make sure you check out Two Rabbits Brewing Company from Shiga Prefecture in Japan. Kanpai.